welcome to Ring the Damn Bell. Tonight, I have me a pretty damn good guest. He is a second generation wrestler. He is the second generation sensation, Brian Hardy, the son of Barry Hardy. How are you?
Good, man. Thank you so much for having me on here tonight. How are you doing?
I am very good. Thank you for coming on. To any of our viewers, if I have to end this abruptly, I am under a tornado watch, so siren starts going off. But I'm sure that if that happens, that hopefully Brian will come back. I can reschedule another one with him.
Absolutely.
But let's get going. I know a lot of times this you talk about this at the end of a podcast, but I want to make sure that we don't forget it. You have a book out there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's on Amazon. It's called Wrestling with Life, Rocking All Night, the Brian Hardy story. It's $30 and it's 15 chapters. It starts from the early days of my childhood all the way up through my music and my pro wrestling career. And I touch on a little bit of everything. There's stories about multiple people in the wrestling business, both good and bad. So for all the wrestling fans out there, I always say I don't ever list the names of the people that I have the bad stories about for legality reasons. But I mean, there's a lot of good. There's more positive in there than there is negative. And those people's names I list in the story. So it's really awesome.
Yeah. So why professional wrestling? I know your father obviously was a professional wrestling. Was it because of your father that you wanted to get into the industry? Was it because you were just such a big fan that even if you didn't have a father in the industry, this what you would have been doing?
So that's actually great that you worded it that way, because of all the interviews I do, nobody ever asks that question that way. And that's great, because the thing is, realistically, if I always tell people, no matter what, whether I had a dad that was in the business or not in the business, I would have ended up in professional wrestling in some way, shape, or form. Like, that's how obsessed I was with it, especially as a child. I don't even, like, I tell people all the time, I'm like, my earliest memory of pro wrestling is sitting on my great grandfather's lap in a rocking chair and watching like the Ultimate Warrior run down the aisle on Superstars. And I'm like, we're talking like 1992. Like, that's probably my earliest memories of pro wrestling. But I mean, the pageantry, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Ultimate Warrior, Ric Flair, all these different guys with these big flashy gimmicks and robes and sequins and all this stuff. I was like, dude, I was hooked from day one just by the pageantry. And I mean, the action was cool and everything like that. It kind of, the tone that was set with having a dad in the wrestling business was like, I remember like turning on Monday Night Raw, sitting on my mom's waterbed, and like Murder, She Wrote was ending and Monday Night Raw was coming on, and like my dad would be wrestling the Steiner brothers and things of that nature and stuff. And it was just like, I always remember my mom saying like, there's your dad. And I'm like, whoa, this is like weird. And I always told people, like, I never grew up with like a normal life. Like, my mom and my dad were divorced when I was very young. And, you know, you'd hear Tommy was going to work on cars with his dad for the weekend, or Johnny was going to play baseball with his dad for the weekend. And it's like, Brian, what did you do this weekend? And it's like, I watched my dad on Mania or on Superstars or this or that or whatever. It's like, so that was just like my earliest memories of pro wrestling. And I never wanted to do anything else besides be a pro wrestler or a rock star. And that was like, I got to, you know, tap into both of those in my lifetime, which I'm eternally grateful for. But yeah, I never had my sights set on anything else. I had talked for a little bit about being like a firefighter or an EMT or something like that. But I mean, my love and passion was always in pro wrestling and music.
Yep. Are you familiar with the Outrunners tag team?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
The reason why I bring them up, the very first time I seen them on AEW and I seen Turbo Floyd, I'm like, that looks like freaking Barry Hardy. Because I grew up watching your dad as a kid as well. And I went, oh my God, that looks just like Barry Hardy, man. Do you find the similarity there with between him and Turbo Floyd?
Yes, and the thing is, I love those guys. So I know people can be controversial about, you know, what side of the fence they're on with AEW or WWE or this or that. For me, I'm like, I love wrestling. Like, I love watching everything. And when I saw those guys, I was just like, what a cool throwback to 80s wrestling. I was like, but then more importantly than that, I'm like, they come out, I'm like, they kind of look like my dad. Then people started laughing because like I mean, I'm getting it back now, but I had cut off my mullet probably about 7-8 months ago, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, before that, like with how long your hair was and the way it was styled and stuff, they were like, you could have been the manager for those guys, like that would have been great, dude. And I'm like, yeah, I was like, but I really love their gimmick. I think they're awesome. So
yeah, and you know, you mentioned how you love, because it's kind of a throwback to the 80s, and you really do like that style of wrestling. Is this why your whatever you created your own promotion? Is this why you put it on Saturday mornings, was because of Saturday morning wrestling?
Yeah, and it's weird because like I was born, so I'm 34, so I was born in 1990. But I mean, everything that I watched as a kid on VHS tapes and stuff like that was like 80s wrestling and that kind of stuff. So my own company, you know, United States Wrestling, I wanted to be a throwback to the 80s big time. I wanted to do studio style wrestling. I'm also a huge fan of like Memphis wrestling when like Lawler was doing the television station stuff and everything. And I'm like, yeah, I want my, you know, my ring announcer or my talk show guy to be like Lance Russell. I want, you know, or a Gordon Soley type deal. I want this, I want that. So everything I did was like constantly a throwback to old wrestling. And like, I wasn't being detrimental, but like a lot of people would say to me like, well, you know, like we want to do this and that. And, you know, they just did this on WWE 6 months ago. And I'm like, stop right there. I'm like, if they did it on WWE 6 months ago, I don't want it on my show.
Right.
And they're like, why? And I'm like, because everything I'm doing is like old school. I was like, I want that old school style throwback. It was so funny because I just wrestled Andrew Anderson. He was in the movie The Wrestler and stuff like that. And he was at one of my shows and he stopped me and he said, do you know who you would get along with very well? And I said, who? And he said, Herb Simmons. Have you ever heard of him? And I said,
he's been on my show twice.
Yeah, I said, yeah. I said, I follow him all the time on Facebook. I said, but we've never like been acquainted or anything. So that night after that show, I went home and I messaged Herb and we probably talked for like an hour online. And it was just such good conversation back and forth. And I was like, wow, like I understand like the gentleman is much older in age than I am. I'm like, but we were like on the same brain wavelength of everything and how we would promote stuff and things of that nature. So I think what he's doing with SICW is fantastic too.
Yeah, he's I can't tell you how much I love him. Same thing. First time I talked to him, just talked to him forever. He's so easy to talk to, and I'm glad you brought Mr. Herb up actually, because FanFest 3, guys, is coming up, and my wife and I, we're going to be there. And there's so many great legends that's going to be there, Brian. We have Tito Santana, Baby Doll. We have the Boogeyman, Kevin Von Erich, so many legends. And what's great about this is, I don't know about your wife, Brian. My wife, not a professional wrestling fan.
Same.
What's great about this is because it's at the Hilton. Man, you know, if your wife's there just to be nice and to hang out for a little bit, but she gets tired of it, she can go up to the room or she can leave and go do some other things, and you don't have to worry about her coming to pick you up and waiting.
That's awesome.
Traffic. That is awesome, guys. So it's the weekend of the 17th. I think it's the 17th and the 18th, if I'm not correct. But yeah, check it out. If you guys are in St. Louis or you want a quick trip for a couple of days, this is an awesome event that's going to be happening. You can buy your tickets at sicw.org. Back to you, Brian. Thanks for letting me do that, man.
I was gonna say that's great, and I like I said, I want that thing to be a huge success for him. I mean, I've seen the ones in the past that he's put on, and just awesome.
Yeah. So, and you kind of talked about it a little bit with you know, people ask you, oh, did you see this on WWE? And you said, I don't want this on my show because you want to be different. What are you doing to make sure that this is your own production?
So that's tough because once again, it's like it's rinse and repeat with that old school style stuff. So I
Right.
always laugh and I say like something that, you go back and you watch from 30 years ago on, tape or something like that. Nobody's going to know that, if you go out there and
Right.
you just put two different faces in and do the same exact angle or something like that,
Right.
like what's old is new again in that sense. But some of the
And
new,
you're right about that, real quick, because people were losing their minds over the angle where they Bond goes blank with names, with Daniel Bryanson got the plastic bag put over his head, right?
yeah,
And people lose their shit over that. And I'm like, this was an angle done in the 80s with the Four Horsemen
yeah.
a couple of times. So you were right about that.
Yeah, what's old is new again. But I think the thing is nowadays, like everybody is so like cancel culture that they don't want to walk that fine line of what can get them shut down or this or that or whatever. For me, like I'm very transparent with everybody. I'm like, look, I know the WWE way because I've been with WWE between the years 2012 to 2019 on and off doing stuff for them. So I'm like, I know the WWE way. I know what they expect. I don't know the AEW way because I've never worked for AEW. So I'm sure, if I ever had the opportunity to work for them, I'd learn a little bit, from how they do business. And I like AEW, but with me,
Wrestling fan, man.
yeah, it's just like, it's crazy because I always tell people, I'm like, I just want to put out good old school wrestling. I don't want anyone to ever have to question whether or not their kids are going to be allowed to watch the product. That's the biggest thing. I have a ton of kids of my own. I'm the closest thing to Stu Hart in modern day. So, but I'm like, I don't ever want any of my kids to have to question. Most of my kids are in the wrestling business right now, but I'm like, I don't want my kids to have to question and go, like, or what we watching right now, like, is that even acceptable? Would we want our 4-year-old niece or nephew or this or that or whatever to be watching this and that? So I always think about that kind of stuff when I'm even booking storylines and different things like that. And I'm like, we can push the envelope a little bit here and there. I'm a huge ECW fan, so it's a tough spot to be in because I'm like, I'm an 80s wrestling fan, but then I'm also like a Paul Heyman ECW fan, and I'm like, how far can we take this without making people question the morale of should they tune in next week because their kid just had nightmares?
Yeah, and that was one of my questions, and I'll get to that. But you mentioned Stu Hart, and you're kind of right. You are because, if I remember correctly, his wife Helen was not a wrestling fan
not at all
either. And you have kids that's wrestling like he does. His wife wasn't a fan, like your wife isn't a fan. So yeah, you're kind of like.
It's so funny because like my wife does not watch the documentaries or anything, and she's used the Helen Hart line a million times that she's felt like she's been snowed under in the wrestling business and she can't get out. And I laugh all the time because Nikolai Volkov was a very close friend of our family, and he used to always say, every time that I'm with Brian and Kayla Hardy, they remind me of so much of Stu and Helen Hart. He was like, but it's funny because he's like, when Brett was little or Owen was little, I used to babysit them, he said, and Brian's kids act the same way the Hart's kids.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you mentioned it, you are an ECW fan. Have you ever thought about having or doing a match like that? Or have you done, these hardcore matches the way to the extreme that they have?
I was going to say, I don't think we've necessarily touched to the limits that they have. The craziest thing that we probably have done since having USW up, because I also used to run a promotion called Maryland Wrestling Federation, MWF. And we actually had a show called An Extreme Evening where I brought in Terry Funk and Shane Douglas and Just Incredible and all these different people, from the original ECW, Nunzio, all that kind of stuff. And we did kind of a show like that back in like 2011. But the most recent thing that we've done under the USW umbrella is last summer we were in Elmore, West Virginia, and we had an Elmore street fight between myself and Huck Sawyer for the USW heavyweight title, where he was the champion at the time, and I picked the title back up that night for the fourth time. And that was, I want to say it was crazy, but it wasn't really crazy. Like, I mean, we had cookie sheets and we had, the toilet plunger and doing funny stuff like plunging my bald spot and comedy stuff like of that nature, but nothing crazy. I think the craziest thing that happened in that match was he took me out to the parking lot, and we have it. It's on YouTube. He took me out to the parking lot and he slammed me on top of his own car. People didn't realize it was his car. They thought it was like a fan's car or something. And the second that my foot hit the windshield, it just shattered the entire windshield. And everybody's like, oh no, like some lady's like standing there, like watching us out in the crowd. And she's like, do mine next. I want an insurance claim.
That's funny. Now, even though you're a younger guy, but the thing is that I don't know if people realize this or not. You're not just some guy that's 30s who decided I want a wrestling promotion. I mean, you've been promoting since you were 19 years old. I mean, at your age, you're already a veteran.
Yeah.
What do you prefer, actually being in the ring wrestling or the promoting side of it and with having your own promotion?
So the younger me, if you would have asked me at 19, I would have been like, man, I've got to be hands-on. I've got to be in everything. I've got to be in every spotlight match. I've got to be in this and that. And I was very much like under the, I guess, the tutelage of the idea that I wanted to be Vern Gagne. I wanted to be Jerry Lawler. I wanted to be Fritz Von Erich. I wanted to be Stu Hart. I wanted to be all these territory, style promoters. And the thing was, these guys, they didn't put the title on themselves out of ego or anything. They put it on themselves for protection of the promotion. Like they knew that being their own champion, nobody was ever going to walk out on them. Nobody was ever going to be able to hold them up. Nobody was ever going to be able to do any of that kind of stuff. So I learned at a young age that was protection. But as I'm getting older now, like I said, 34, and in wrestling years, that's like 94. But 34, I look at things way different now. And especially with my kids all being wrestlers and stuff like that now, I enjoy we're going to film, and I've said this to people, and you'll get the first scoop of this for any interview. Awesome. We're gonna film a backstage like production on how the USW stuff works. And I don't think anybody would believe how crazy it is in the back, because it's like so professionally run. It's not like all over the place and stuff, but it's so professionally run. But the part that feels messy is I sit backstage the entire time in a suit and tie, and I'm at gorilla position. And I don't talk to my opponents, which is a big thing too, is like if people see that Brian Hardy is their opponent on the sheet in the back, they're like, almost crapping bullets, because they're like, oh man, I know I'm not going to have any time to talk to him about anything. And I'm like, I promise you, if you go out there with me and you listen, eyes and ears open and mouth shut, I'm going to take care of you, and we're going to get through this thing just fine. And obviously if it's a guy like a King Kalua or an Andrew Anderson or somebody like that, I let them lead, because they have so many more years than I do, and whoever has the most experience in the business. So if it's one of those guys, they lead the match and I just follow their cue. If it's another guy that's only got 2, 3, 4 years in the business and I've got 17 years in, then I lead the match and whatever, but I'm like, just listen to me. And but it's a wild process to see, because like I've got a headset on, I'm in a suit and tie, and you just start seeing me get naked, and I'm taking the headset off and I'm pulling my tights up and I'm lacing my boots and doing this and that. Then I'm popping the headset back on and I'm still giving the commentators and the referees cues. And then I literally turn around, take the headset off, give it to somebody else that I trust in production, give the person that I'm getting ready to go wrestle knucks, like, all right, you good? All right, I'll see you out there. Cool. And then we go out there and we do the damn thing. And I'm like, it's so old school, but I love it. And I love it that way. But it does, to answer your question, that was elaboration on that. But to answer your question, it literally, to me, I wish sometimes that I wouldn't have to get dressed. I wish that I wouldn't have to pull the tights on. I wish that I wouldn't have to put the boots on. I kind of just want to be back there with just a headset and doing my thing, because I'm really in my zone there and I really enjoy doing that.
Yeah. So would you say that you've kind of looked up to Vince McMahon as far as you doing this? Because I know, like Vince McMahon, at one time you had a tag team that you sent back out to redo a match because you didn't like it. So the question to add on about Vince McMahon, whether or not he's someone you admire, was I also want to know the story about why you sent the tag team back out. What did you see that was wrong with their match? Okay,
so that was funny, because people have asked, they're like, how many times have you done that? And I'm like, I've only done it once so far with that. I think we just experienced something on our most recent pay-per-view where I had to send a battle royal out 3 times, and it was like everybody started, the bell didn't ring at a proper time, this and that, whatever, they all got started. I'm screaming in the headset, and then all of a sudden they come walking through the back. Guys, we're going back out there, we're sending you out again. We do all the cues all over again in front of a studio audience. They do it 3 times. On the 3rd time, I'm just kicking stuff. Like I'm just flipping stuff around backstage. And my wife is like, calm down, calm down. And they get to the back and she goes, guys, let me just ask you a question. If you understand the words that are coming out of Brian's mouth right now, raise your hand. And then everybody raises their hands and she goes, guys, please do it properly this time. I said, if you guys don't do it properly this time, I said, I'm going to take this shirt off and I'm going to come out there. I said, and I'm going to start lighting everybody up. And everybody got it done that time. But the tag team match, that was on the second or third episode of Justice. And it was just, they did it. They got into the back, and I noticed right away as it was taking place, the referee was out of position, and the referee is one of my sons. So the referee was out of position. The pinfall wasn't counted properly. The selling that the enhancement guys were doing was not like up to my par. And then the shine that the babyface tag team really needed, they weren't delivering that. And even at the end, I needed a nice big celebration and stuff like that. And I didn't felt I got that. So they came through the back and I literally just stopped them, and everybody else is standing in the backstage looking, and I'm like, you're going to go back out there and do that again. And they were literally like, yes, sir. And right back out. Same exact match to a T from the start, all over again with more energy, more selling, and the referee's in position of where he needs to be. And I literally said, take that. I looked at the camera guy and I said, take that first camera and toss that in the trash, never to be seen again. I said, and then the other one, make sure it makes TV next week.
So you mentioned your kids a couple of times. I know a lot of parents who were in the business, a lot of times they don't want their kids going in that direction because it could be pretty tough.
Yes.
How do you feel about your kids being wrestlers? Is this something that when they were kids, you're like, yeah, I'm going to have me a generation of wrestlers? Or was this something that you're like, man, we got to try to guide our kids in a different direction?
This was totally out of left field. And to answer your other thing too, I'm trying to go back and get it. I was heavily influenced by Vince McMahon I really did think, just as a kid, the production value wise, all that stuff, I really thought like Vince did a good job with things. And he was ruthless. He wanted his business the way he wanted it done. I don't think I'm that ruthless. I don't think I'm that heartless at times. And I've got to, I've had my moments with Vince McMahon backstage at WWE and stuff like that. He was kind to me. So I can't say anything bad in that sense. I know that stuff has taken place over the last couple of years in the news and stuff like that. But
people don't know how to separate the genius side of people when they do wrestling from the personal aspect.
Yes, and that's the thing. Who he is as a person, I don't know, because I'm not going out to Ruth Chris's steakhouse with him or this or that or whatever. But the boss, the guy that needed stuff done, the guy that when I got done coming backstage, I'm hearing him scream in gorilla position, "That was so freaking great!" Like this, and I'm like, awesome, like love that. Good, good to me. So I can't say nothing bad. But with my kids, no, it was never like yes, this is going to be their lifestyle, this and that. I had a son, Owen, who is Owen Maverick on USW Justice. None of my kids use the Hardy last name at all. And that is honestly for two reasons. Number one, it would look pretty weird if it was a Hardy wrestling a Hardy on certain parts of Justice and stuff like that. But then the other thing was, they all just wanted to, make their own way, pave their own name, this and that. But I will say Owen knew he wanted to do this since he was born too. And Owen has had just the craziest life that people would never even believe, from the John Cena's to the Billy Gunns walking him around in the locker room to this, that, whatever. I mean, the kid had like the ultimate wrestling life. And all my other kids, it was all out of left field. It was like, surprise, Dad, we want to be in the business. And I'm like, no, you don't. You want to go to college and you want this and you want that and go figure out something else to do. Like go get married, go, like anything but pro wrestling. Right. And just because I've seen what the business has done to me and my wife, it's given us a lot. It really has. But then at times it's really taken a lot from us as well. And it's a give and take. You have to, love it. And you have to know that sometimes it can just provide for you in ways that you would never expect imaginable. And I give people a little tiny story all the time of like, main eventing in Lockport, New York with Hexall Jim Duggan, and about to have my electricity shut off and barely any food in the house and this and that. And I'm like buying ramen noodles and stuff like that to make sure that the kids are going to eat and whatever else and this and that. And I'm like broker than a joker. And I've got to drive 8 hours from Maryland to Lockport, New York to main event the Keenan Arena with Hexall Jim Duggan. And by intermission, I came out to the table to see how we were doing money-wise. And my wife said, "You just did $1,700 in trading cards and autographs." And I said, "Wow, so that means we could pay the electric bill?" Right. And she said, "And go buy groceries." And I said, "Cool, well then this is going to work." So it's worked for me in situations like that. There's been other times too where I've literally had, however much money in the bank, and I'm literally like, all right, we're going to do good. And then it's on a weekend like Memorial Day weekend where the show completely flops and barely anybody shows up. And then the next thing I know, I'm draining my bank account to literally, make up for whatever it is that I'm not making in ticket sales and stuff like that. So it's a give and take. But there's been more positive than there's been negative out of the pro wrestling industry. But I just didn't know that it was something I wanted my kids to really be a part of.
Yeah. And you mentioned something interesting to me about, if a show flops. Either as a professional wrestler, even if you're wrestling for someone else or one of your shows, if that show flops for whatever reason, is this something that you take upon yourself and you feel like is something that you did or didn't do to get the people in? Or do you kind of put that accountability on your employees, basically your wrestlers, that they didn't get out there and sell to get the show in? How do you handle that?
When I was younger, I would put the blame, 19 years old, I'd put the blame on anybody else but me. Right. Accountability is the most perfect word. And for being such a young kid back then and thinking that I knew everything and not knowing jack, it was easier to put the blame on everybody else. And, you'd yell at the talent and, you guys need to push the show a little bit harder and this and that, when in reality, I'm the promoter. I'm the guy, the buck stops with me. As an older guy now, it hurts because everybody that I know literally says Brian's like one of the hardest working guys. He buys the professional flyers and the professional posters and this and that and does everything around the town and gets sponsors and endorsements and all this other stuff. And if it does well, then it does well. If it flops, I start to get upset. But I think it's because I see how much time and effort I'm putting into it and how much hard work I'm really putting into it. And I can never say I didn't do enough, because from my end, I will always be the guy now saying I'm going to do enough. So that way I can never say to myself, I didn't do enough. But it's tough because all these other guys, they're independent contractors. I'm not signing them to, huge salaries and stuff like that. So they might share it, they might share the flyer out on their Facebook page or on this or that or whatever. And if they do, cool. And if they don't, it kind of hurts me, because like there's times where I literally see, there's guys right now on my roster that I've complained to them in the last couple of weeks because I see that they're not sharing any of my stuff out, not even my weekly episodes that they're on. But then they're sharing like 5, 6, 7 other independent flyers for all these other shows that they're really stoked to be a part of. And I'm literally like, guys, come on, what are we doing here? Like, why am I investing this precious airtime and this precious this and that into you guys? Why am I making trading cards of you guys? Why am I putting out programs? Why am I doing this and that and blah, 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 and action figures if you guys are not, interested in really giving it your all? And everybody's first thing, of course, is money. Like, and I'm like, okay, well, like, you want me to pay you this excessive amount of money, but you won't even share a flyer for me, So I'm like, when I always tell people, I'm like, you get what you put in type thing. Right. So it's like, if I see other guys really sharing out the flyers and the posters and the this and the that, those are the guys that I want to put the belts on. Those are the guys that I want to, give an action figure or a trading card to or whatever, because then I know that they're marketing. You know what I mean?
Right. So what do you define as a successful show? Is it, obviously it's make, if I assume is if the show made money, but there has to be so much more than just making money.
Yeah.
So what is a perfect show for you?
So it's hard because, like, my wife, like I said, for as much as she's not in the wrestling business, my wife is a lot of the behind the scenes of the business.
My wife too. Yeah.
If you asked her, she would tell you breaking even. Like she's
Right.
like, we don't even have to make an extra dollar. We don't want to make a dollar less. She's
Right.
like, but we don't even have to make an extra dollar. She's like, and if we do and we're up $1, hey, that's great. But breaking even is always key. And not back in the day, we took so much out of our own pockets that nowadays she's like, that's why we do sponsors and endorsements and this and that and whatever, because we don't want anything coming out of our pockets. She's like, and if stuff is coming out of our pockets, she's like, then that's a problem, because then that segues into time and time again. And then before you know it, your company has no money left and then you're going bankrupt and all that other kind of stuff. So we've learned our lessons over the years, and stuff like that. For me though, it has so much more to do with, stuff than just money. And I always tell people, I'm like, if we're going off of money and this and that, I think the biggest thing too, that like constantly, and not to be like a whiner or a crybaby about it, but I think the thing that hurts my feelings a lot of times is I hear a lot of, I'll say, I hate the word mark. I don't like using the word mark. I think it's derogatory. So I'll say I hear a lot of uneducated wrestling fans saying like, oh, well, you were just a job guy. And I hate the word job or two. I like enhancement, but you were just a job guy on WWE, or your dad was just a job guy on WWE, or this or that, or whatever. And it just makes them sound so uneducated. And I think they base like someone's career off of that. And I'm like, if that's what we're talking about here, like, that's a really terrible way to look at things. I'm like, because I got to wrestle so many guys in my career that I grew up watching on TV that I absolutely loved. I got to see a lot of the United States and other parts of the other countries on other promoters' dimes. There was just, it was so cool to not have to use my own money to travel and go, to other places and things of that nature over the years and stuff. And I don't think that a light bulb goes off when people make comments like that. And I'm like, so for me, the basis of how success is measured is definitely never in dollar amounts. I mean, yeah, you don't want to lose money.
Right.
Really the experiences, it's the people you meet, it's the friends that you do make along the way. I know that people say they don't make friends. I say a lot of times too, I don't have a lot of friends. I have a lot of acquaintances, but I've really made a lot of friends because of pro wrestling. And whether that would be people that are inside the business or fans that sit in the audience, people that come to buy, autographs at conventions, and then they find out that I like a certain type of music. So then they start making me burn CDs and stuff, like it's just, You meet so many, like most of the best interactions I've had with people, even sitting here talking to you right now, is because of professional wrestling. So,
well, I've only been doing this for a few months, and I've already made so many friends within the industry. I mean, that has just been such an awesome experience. So I do agree with you. I'm going to go off script for a second because you brought something up, and this is a debate of, speaking of making friends with someone in the industry. It's a debate between me and someone who's in the industry. You mentioned the word mark. Now, I'm 52 years old, so I guess you kind of say in my time, right? The word mark was a compliment. I mean, if you look at the definition of a mark, when it comes to professional wrestling, it's someone who truly invests in what's going on, and they don't care about the backstage stuff. They don't think they know it all. That would be a smart mark.
yes.
So, for you, because you said you believe the word mark is derogatory. So, are you saying that you think that being a mark is a bad thing? I mean, don't you want marks? They feel you're building up.
Yeah, I think that the way that I hear some of the wrestlers word, and say, oh, this mark and this, and I look at it like, no, that's a fan,
Right.
that's a fan. That's somebody that is paying money for your t-shirt. That's somebody that's buying your 8x10. That's somebody that's watching your every move. So why are you going to say the word mark like it's derogatory? Like they almost use it as like something that is like very, to me, it's nonsensical. Like I kind of look at them and I just look over like when they say that kind of stuff, and I'm like, he's a fan, dude. Like he's a fan. He's the reason that you're getting paid tonight. Like he's the reason that you're able to put gas in your tank or food on your plate. And so that's my thing. I've always treated the fans, the marks, as the wrestlers who are too cool for school, say. Like I just always was like, I've always had a different relationship with the fans. I've always been like, you're the reason that I'm here. You're the reason that I'm doing this, and you're the reason that my kids have new clothes or have this or that. So I'm eternally grateful for that.
Absolutely.
Like I said, there's some guys in the wrestling business that use that term, and I don't like the way that they use it because it's not even in like a nice context or anything.
Right. No, I agree. And Triple M, man, you know, I love you, brother, but you didn't just hear this from just a average Joe. This is coming from a guy who literally was born into the business and it bleeds in his veins. I was right. You were wrong. We can move on now. So, you know, a lot of guys believe that, you know, to start a promotion, that, you know, all you have to do is have these contacts, have these big stars come. My question for you is this: what's more important to you? Because I imagine you have to have a crap ton of contacts, obviously, between you and your dad. What's more important than you? Having the bigger stars come to draw in that crowd, or is it more important for you to build character, basically build your homegrown star?
That's tough. That is a tough question because I mean it can go either way. For me, I've always been about so like we'll say like as from a promoter standpoint, we'll say like you know you see quite a bit of independent promoters that bring in like a WWE guy to their independent show because he's already very well known and this and that and whatever. There's nothing wrong with that, you know. Spacing on his real life name real quick. Dolph Ziggler. Nick. Nick Nemeth.
Yeah, that's it.
So like he's making his rounds right now, and he's doing really well on the independent circuit, and he's getting paid, and he's just everywhere. You know, you see him popping up at all these different independent shows and stuff, and that's fantastic. And you know, from a human to a human, that's great that he's out there making his money and doing his thing. But I think that like, if he's coming in to enhance, so to speak, younger talent, a newer talent, and help elevate the status of that talent to the next level, then that's why he should be there. He shouldn't just be coming in just to like beat people and on to the next and on to the next and on to the next. I know that the fans want to see him win because they're comfortable with who he was in WWE and this and that. He's got to win. He's got to win. But don't you think it would be good if the guy that nobody knows that's up and coming, you know, this and that, he needs to get elevated to that next level in his career, and Nick Nemeth is the one to do that for him? That would be fantastic. So it's a tough spot when, you know, you sit there and you think about all that kind of stuff, because I'm like, oh, it can go either way. But yeah, there's a ton of contacts in the wrestling business that I know. It's funny because there's an old saying, and it's like, you know, be careful of the toes you step on, you know, your way up the ladder, because they might be connected to the butt that you might kiss on the way back down. And I laugh because there's a lot of guys in the wrestling business that just think, oh, he's Brian Hardy, who gives a crap, blah, 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 and that. And then it's like when they find out that I'm friends with half the guys that are backstage at WWE right now, or that I'm friends with this guy or that guy, and then I'm like, I'm giggling because I'm like reading text messages where they're like, this guy just said this really horrible thing about you on the internet or whatever. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, dude, don't even sweat it. And I'm like, it is what it is. I mean, most of the people that I meet that ever have a bad thing to say about me usually have never even met me. So I'm like, that's the thing. And like my favorite story, it's in my book, is my brother-in-law was sitting in a locker room one time. And my brother-in-law is on USW Justice as well. Big wrestling family. And he's stunning Adam Armstrong. And he was backstage. He was backstage in the locker room, and he said that there was a couple guys sitting on the other side of the locker room. Brian Hardy this, Brian Hardy that, telephone, telegram, tele-wrestler. And he walks over to them and he says, hey, like, do you guys know Brian Hardy? And they were like, well, no, but we heard from so-and-so that he did this and he said that and whatever. And he's like, but you never met Brian Hardy. And they're like, no, never met him. And he's like, okay, well, he's my brother-in-law. Saying that kind of stuff, he would stretch you right now in front of the whole locker room. And it's stuff like that. Like I said, I let it slide off the wayside, but people are comical in this business.
Oh, yeah. So I want to read something to you. Let me pull it up. Just one sec. Here we go. All right. You had sent a post out on social media, and I want to ask you about this.
Sure.
You said that someone sent this to me earlier at 1:45 in the video. This sounds like someone I know, and it's true. Those exact things have probably come out of my mouth 20 times in the last week. You're going to say years ago in ECW. Oh, Brian. All right, guys, let me get him back real quick. I'm not sure exactly what happened. There he is. I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah,
I was about to say, man, you don't have to answer the question. Just don't hang up.
no, all right. I'm sorry about that. Where were you headed with it?
So, you're talking about years ago at ECW, a wrestler came up to you and said, some people are born with it. Some people learn it. Some people never get it. This is, you were referencing a video that was out of Triple H recently.
Yes.
And talking to HBK about some guys, even the biggest stars we have now, just don't get it. So you continue to say this. Some people would never get it, even if you hand it to them on a silver platter. You were born for this business, Brian Hardy. You're saying that someone told you this. I could do this stuff in my sleep, you said. It took me about the first 4 years of my career to really learn psychology, but once the light bulb went off, there was no turning back. This is my question. Is there any way of explaining what it actually is for the fans?
Yes. So it is a lot of things all tied into one. So if you go back and you look at that interview, Triple H says things like, placement, this guy, and really what I was touching on from a promoter standpoint, I was talking about it from a talent standpoint, but from a promoter standpoint, because I can understand both ends, And from a promoter standpoint, it's the tough part of, well, you got to make sure that this guy hits his times with this. You got to make sure that this guy doesn't wrestle this guy because they don't like each other, so they'll physically hurt each other in the ring. So we got to keep them away from each other. We got to this, we got to that, we got to blah, blah. It's all this backstage stuff that plays factor in things where I go.
I'm sorry. Let me interrupt you about what you just said, that,
Sure.
You don't want to put two people who don't like each other and turn into a real fight. But isn't that part of the talent, have that professionality? Because we all know, we've seen it in the business, the different real life heat.
Yes.
But man, they made money in the match together because people know this.
Yes.
So are you against that then? Or explain that a little bit to me.
Okay, so from an in-ring standpoint, I 110% agree with you. Half of the greatest feuds in wrestling usually are guys that legitimately do not like each other, and they go in and they can do business. In this day and age, I don't think that some of the gentlemen that are in the business are of the same professional level that people years previous to them were. And I think that they would try to rather take liabilities on each other, or they would just kind of go completely off the rails and do something in ring that could be unpredictable, which could not only end up hurting themselves, but it could end up hurting people in the audience. It could end up hurting, anybody else, for that matter, in any situation. So for me, I would always go, if it sounds like it's going to be an insurance disaster, then we don't want to go that route, there are guys in my locker room that I go, oh my gosh, this guy doesn't like this guy, so let's not ever have them even remotely close in a ring together, because I don't know how it will end, and I don't want to find out how it will end. So, but then there's other situations from a talent end of the spectrum. So that was the promoter end of the spectrum that I was agreeing with Triple H on. From the talent end of the spectrum, it is tough. There's guys out there that, you book people, and somebody was on my page yesterday. We'll put it this way. Somebody was on my page yesterday and really got crappy with me about me apparently running my mouth around the town about them and stuff like that. I moved from Baltimore, Maryland to Seaford, Delaware. That's currently where I'm at right now, is in Seaford, Delaware. Nice, quiet little area. I live in the country. I have no neighbors around me. It is it is peace of mind. We'll put it that way. And And I think hand to God, I think that probably in the last month, I've been out of my house maybe 6 times.
Mhm.
We're talking like the Dollar General, the Dollar Tree, maybe a crab shack, maybe a pizza place, and to drop my kid off to work one time. So, I mean, we're talking like, I cut myself. I completely disconnect from life, and I put my cell phone down. I'm at home. I just want to spend time with my kids, my dogs. I just want to, be a family guy and stuff like that. This dude has the nerve to be like, it's a small town. People talk and, it's not appreciated that you're crapping all over my wrestling school and blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like literally sitting there thinking 2 things, bro. Number one, why do you think that I would do that? When I previously worked for the promoter for years and I never had an issue with him, it's like, number one, why do you think I would do that? Number 2, I've got kids in this business now. Right. So if you honestly think that I've got 6 children of my own that are in this business and you think that I'm going to take the time to run around and talk shit about you, and in reality, it could come back bad on my kids, like, not going to do that. So at that point in time, I kind of got upset because I was like, I wrote back to the guy, nothing but respect for you, man, this and that. And I truthfully felt that way, but like me. And I was a little bit flustered by it because I was like, oh man, but once again, the characters of the business, I would be upset, if I found out that another promoter was coming into my territory and this and that and whatever. But instead of just saying, hey man, let's work together and do good business, this or that or whatever, it's instantly like, nope, just cut your throat and go on about it and stuff. So that's rough. But yeah, like back to what I was saying, from the talent end of the spectrum, though, you would not believe how many guys can't cut a promo. You would not believe how many guys don't understand ring psychology. We're just going to do a bunch of moves and flips and put things together and this and that and bing, bing, bing and whatever. And I'm like, where's the selling? Where's the storytelling? Where is I understand that you're doing this, and this, but tell me why you're doing this, and this. Like, explain to me. There's a lot of that. And I don't understand that kind of stuff. So then I host these these training seminar camps where basically guys that want to, honestly, hand to God, I would tell you a million times that probably in the last month, I've had 60 to 70 emails from guys. Would love to come in and work for USW. Would love to come in and work for USW. Here's a highlight reel. And it's just all the guys' best moves that they're doing. Not like a full match or anything, all their best moves. And then here's a promo. Well, guess what? They could have cut that promo in their bedroom 90 times till they got it perfect and cut and pasted pieces together. And then now they've got the most perfect promo. No. I want to run this like a business. And people always say, oh, it's a money grab. It's a this and that. No. It's a business. I pay for a training facility every month, I pay hundreds of dollars to have a training facility. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to charge a certain amount of money to these guys. They're not my students. I'm not saying that they're not properly trained in professional wrestling or anything like that. I'm just simply saying, put your money where your mouth is. Look at yourself as an investment. Come in, pay your money, stand in front of me, cut a 45 to 60 second promo. Prove to me that you can work on the fly. Prove to me that you can get in a ring. And if the guy tells you to duck a clothesline and you accidentally miss and you guys are both frozen, how do you fix that? And where do you go from there? There's so much stuff in this business that they don't understand like that. And a lot of those guys, they're afraid that if they did put their money where their mouth was, that I would literally go, all right, get out of my ring. I've seen enough. You're not doing this properly. You're not being safe. You're not this, you're not that. And I'm not saying that I'm the greatest of all time, but I'm definitely saying professional wrestling is the only thing that I've ever dedicated my entire life to besides being a father or a musician. So I'm like, I'd like to think that I've been enough places, wrestled enough people, and know enough things to literally say right from wrong. And that's why so many promoters bring me into their different promotions and have seminars with me before the shows where I'm teaching people in their rings and stuff like that. Because at the end of the day, I want everyone to do well. I want everyone to eat. There are some guys in the wrestling business that I don't like, but just because I don't like you doesn't mean I don't want you to eat. I just don't want you to eat at my table,
No, understandable. Now, you've mentioned WWE a couple of times. Am I correct when I say that one of the lowest times in your professional wrestling career was actually the very first time you were called up to go to WWE? Share that with us so the fans could know.
Yeah, so the very first time I was ever on WWE was 2012. I was working at a biolab full time and sitting in filling vials one day, and all of a sudden my telephone rings and it's a 203 number, and I'm like, oh, this is Stamford, Connecticut. This is crazy. I've been calling them for 4 years. And like, since I first broke into the business, and they never gave me the time of day or anything like that. So randomly out of nowhere, I get a telephone call and I answer it. And it is the person in charge of extra talent for WWE. And they literally call and say, William Regal is interested in having you for a 2-day tryout. Would you be interested in coming and this and that? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Like, when, where? And they're like, well, you're going to do Nassau Coliseum for Monday Night Raw, and the next night you're going to do the Baltimore Arena for SmackDown. And that's when they were pre-taping SmackDown on Tuesdays to air on Friday nights. And I said, yeah. And I mean, I always giggle because like we got through the entire conversation, and at the very end, you know, typical Brian, not like Brian, who should just be humble and thankful that he's getting an opportunity. Brian, the father and the husband, instantly that goes, how much are you paying me each day to be here? You know, and business, just always business. And they tell me, and I said, great, I'll be there. And I called my wife, and I was so upset because my grandmother had just passed away a few months before that, and she had raised me, and she was like my biggest believer and supporter and everything like that. And I was like, man, I wish my grandma was alive to like see that I got this telephone call from WWE. So,
and let me interrupt you because, and I'm hoping that you have enough time for us to go there.
Sure.
But your grandmother, if I remember correctly, actually had a big part of you first being able to get that footstep in professional wrestling. Just that the fans know it. Again, hopefully we have time. It depends on your time.
Yeah, I was gonna say absolutely. So my grandmother like had actually helped me purchase my first wrestling ring, and it's weird because it's my mom's mom. It wasn't even my dad's mom. So, but my grandma was like just a huge believer in me, and I always said she saw the diamond in the rough, and she was just polishing me till I shine, pretty much. And she was just a firm believer in chase your dreams, whatever your dreams are. Don't ever let anybody mess with your dreams. Go for it and get whatever you can. And she helped me acquire my first wrestling ring. We had it delivered. So I grew up as a kid. My dad was one of 3 owners of the Monster Factory with Charlie Fulton and Larry Sharp. And so my dad had a ring in our basement when I was little. And then as I got older, we had a ring out in the backyard. I actually have owned 2 pro wrestling rings in the last decade, but then most recently I just bought another wrestling ring. So kind of crazy that I'm as young as I am, and I've owned 3 pro wrestling rings, and my dad had one before I was even, you know, really doing the thing. So, but my grandmother, just an absolute great lady and just a big believer. And she was the main focal point of someone who helped get me to where I needed to be. Cause I much like anybody else, I didn't want to be the guy who just rode off daddy's coattails and this and that and whatever. I wanted to pave my own way. And people always say, man, that's kind of hypocritical because you use the term second generation sensation. And I didn't use that to help get me over. I used that more as like a tribute to my father. Like, so that way when people would see second generation sensation, they would go, who's your dad? You know, and then instantly, if they didn't know, that was my chance to inform them. This is who my father was, and educating the pro wrestling fan on who came before me. Big historian on that end of things. So I love doing that. I would talk to anybody about anything pro wrestling and fill them in on whatever. You know, people always say like you and your son are like walking dictionaries and encyclopedias of pro wrestling, but just love it and just always want to share information. So that was my thing with the second generation thing. But I wanted to do it my own way. I signed up for a pro wrestling school about 30 minutes away from my house, and they took my money and basically beat the living crap out of me. And I was cool with that. I wasn't like I wasn't afraid of paying dues, so to speak. I was more so upset about the idea that like they're taking this money from me and not teaching me anything. And they were just, like I was just basically a beat up dummy for like months and months and months for these guys that were like, trying to get over in these local independent feds and stuff like that. And I was like, look, like I'm here to learn how to wrestle, like I want ground and pound to the ground. I want to be locking people in holds and this and that and whatever. Like, I do not want to just sit around and like take 1.5 million back elbows and, the spirit squad thing up in the air from, 5 of the guys in the business and stuff. So yeah, my grandma, I came home one day and I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to quit. And she was like, what? And I said, yeah, I said, this business isn't for me. And she's like, are you kidding? This has been your whole life. Like, what are you talking about? And she did help me acquire the first ring. I got to that point. So back to the WWE thing. Pretty much, I show up to the Nassau Coliseum and I get out of the car and I start walking with my bag, and I'm wearing like almost like a mafia style pinstripe suit that day. And I'm like walking and I just hear, and I'm like, what? I like turn around and look, and my wife is just a blubbering mess, like in the car. And she had just drove me 4.5 hours there. And I said, what? Like, what is wrong? Are you okay? And she goes, I told you for years you were never going to be on WWE. You were never going to make it. Everybody had said you were never going to make it. This and that. She said, and now you're getting ready to walk into the Nassau Coliseum for Monday Night Raw. And she said, you did it. And I'm like, all right, well, I haven't done it yet. Like we're getting there. So
Right.
All of a sudden I go in, and I was like, at that point in time, I finally got the pat on the back from my wife that I had longed for about 4 to 5 years before that. And went in there, and the first night in, it was Dean Ambrose had just come from FCW. And he was John Moxley then, before he was even Dean Ambrose and stuff like that. And he was in little tiny trunks and stuff like that, coming straight from FCW, the developmental, and called up to the main roster. And that night, specific agent, I won't say his name. I do not like him. I talk very badly about him in my book. He was just a horrible human being. And all these years later, he no longer works for WWE. And there's a lot of people that say that he is a terrible person, and it just confirms all of my stories. But he wanted to screw with me that night, and he just kept saying, Hardy, you're dark tonight. And I was like, yes, sir. And then I went and I got my gear on. Well, the rule backstage at WWE is like, you always have to be in a suit and tie. And if you're not in a suit and tie, then you're in your wrestling gear if you're getting ready to perform or whatever. And so like I would be in my suit and tie, and then I had to get into my gear, and then I was back into my suit and tie, and then into my gear. And he just kept saying, Hardy, you're dark tonight. Nope, you're not. So-and-so, you're dark tonight. And he would just go back and forth. And it was like a game for like an hour. And I was just like, he's ribbing me. Like he is ribbing me. Like I know that this is not like, this isn't cool. So the very end, I was very discouraged. And Mick Foley was very cool to me that day. And like, you're not supposed to, if you're an extra talent WWE, you're not supposed to sit with like the upper talent of the roster and stuff like that. And I remember like walking by where they were all sitting, like viewing the show. And Mick Foley said, hey kid, you can come sit here. And I was like, what? Like, you sure? And he's like, yeah. And he like pulled the chair up. Somebody tried to say something to me, and Mick Foley cut the dude off and was like, he can sit here and watch a show. Like, and I was like, okay, cool. So like, they were very like, there were certain guys at WWE that were very welcoming to me because like they knew who I was, or they knew who my dad was, or this or that or whatever. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then right after that, Arn Anderson walked up to me, and like he put his hand on my shoulder. He goes, hey kid. And I said, yes, sir. And he goes, I know you're a little bit disgruntled about earlier today and stuff like that. He said, it's okay. He said, I think we'll have something for you tomorrow night in Baltimore. I said, okay. So left there that day. I was all stoked. I got in the car. I told my wife, like, Arn Anderson said he's probably going to have something for me tomorrow in Baltimore. Like, I'm excited. Like, I'm like, I think they're going to give me Ryback. Like, this is great. And I just knew like, all right, this might be my first time ever on national TV. Like I had been on local TV for years and stuff like that, right. But I was like, this will be my first time on national TV. So we made it to the Baltimore Arena that day, worked out with Regal for an hour or two. Everything was really good. Regal was saying a bunch of really awesome stuff to me, and Regal was nothing but amazing every time I've ever been to WWE to me. Like I know some guys don't get along with him. He puts a lot of guys in their place. He's kind of cut from the same cloth as me and just gives it to people straight. And he taught me so much. And it was kind of one of those things where I'm like walking away and I literally hear Arn Anderson talking to Regal, and he's like, yep, like he's the guy tonight. And I'm like, all right, like awesome. And yeah, next thing I knew, I was like getting ready. I'm all geared up and ready to rock and roll. There was like a bunch of little side stories to that night, like where the Uso brothers like came to my defense because the Maryland State Athletic Commission guy at the time was like being a complete jerk to me and like was trying to make me go to the back of the line to get cleared and stuff like that and everything. And the Usos like pushed me up in front of them in line. I was like, so Jimmy and Jay were the real ones for doing that kind of stuff, like had my back and all that stuff.
Now I know Cody at some point says something to you that you had mentioned that it could have been perceived kind of asshole-ish when you were younger at that time.
Yeah.
Does this fall within this night as well?
Yes. So as I'm getting ready, I'm waiting for Ryback. We talked earlier in the day. They were going to do Feed Me 3 that night, and they ended up not doing it. And it was supposed to be me and Black G's And it was also supposed to be a guy named Joey Lugo, who wrestled as Ricky Martinez in the Allentown, PA area. Joey Lugo, they ended up pulling him off at the last second, which I felt bad because that guy had a great look. I mean, just there's certain guys in the business that things shouldn't happen to. And I'm like, that sucks because to me, I've always had a lot of respect for him. And I'm like, he looked the part. He should have been on that and whatever and this and that. They pull him off because Ryback tries to lift all three of us before doors open and he can't do it. Like Joey keeps falling off the top of him and like not on purpose, but it's awkward having three guys up on you. And it's so crazy because later on in that match, Booker T says on commentary, they should feed him 3. And I'm like, did anybody get the memo earlier in the afternoon that did not work? Like, and so it was funny because I'm standing backstage waiting for Ryback. He's coming up the rampway and he's getting ready himself and he's getting himself all pumped and stuff. And as he's over there, me and Black G's are standing off to the side. There's like 2 or 3, like I said, different stories that took place. The first of which, Cody Rhodes walks by me and he puts his hand on my shoulder and he literally goes, "You ready tonight, kid?" And I'm like, "Yes, sir," this and that. And he goes, "Good, we'll enjoy it because it may never happen again." And I literally was like, at the time I'm thinking, what a jerk, like, like this and that and whatever else. But he was so real, like that was a very harsh reality. If you're an extra talent at WWE, that may be your one and only time. You may never get a chance ever again to be on WWE television. So you better just use that for what it is, soak it all in, make the most of it, everything like that. We're standing backstage after he says that to me, and John Cena is sitting with his legs propped up at a table, not in gorilla position, but right behind gorilla position. There's a monitor there, and John's just sitting there watching the show. Vince McMahon turns around and looks at me and Black G's, and he puts his hand like this as he's walking by. He's got a suit coat in his arm and everything. He goes, "Shh," and we're like, okay. And then all of a sudden he turns around, boom, and nails the back of Cena's chair, like knees the back of Cena's chair. Cena pops up, and he turns around. Vince hides behind a curtain. And all Cena sees is me and Black G's. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to die, bro. Like, didn't help that the day before that, I had accidentally smacked John Cena in the face because I'm like walking and I'm out by ringside and I'm doing this and that. And boom. And as soon as I fling my hand, it catches him in the face and he goes, "John Cena, nice to meet you." And I was like, oh, like, what the hell? Like, I didn't mean that. I'm sorry. Totally cool. But the next day I'm thinking, now he thinks I need the back of his chair. He's going to kill me. Like, this is insane. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, like, Vince comes, like, walking out, and he's like, "Hey, John, how you doing?" And I was like, oh, God, thank God. I'm like, he was, like, ready to kill me. So then Ryback comes up. Vince goes to Gorilla. Ryback comes up and literally goes, "Oh, Vince just walked by. He loves my matches." And I'm like, okay, so let's not disappoint tonight, fellas. And I'm like, okay, like, no pressure at all. Like, so we went out there, coolest guy in the world. I know Ryback's got a lot of problems with people in the business at certain times and stuff too. And a lot of the guys that I've heard say bad things about Ryback, I like those guys too. So I'm like, it's a tough tele-wrestler situation. Ryback was nothing but amazing to me. And even all these years later, he still keeps in touch with me. We still talk every now and again. When I was going through one of the darkest points in my life where I literally felt like I was ready to get a contract when we came backstage from that match and everything went well, and then I didn't get signed, and I went into this terrible downward spiral in my life where, that was really like one of the first times I had ever felt like suicidal because of the wrestling business and stuff like that. Ryback was the first one to like reach out to me, like just like less than a few weeks after that and say, "Hey man, I want you to read this book. It's called The Secret. And once you read it, it will literally turn your entire life around," and blah, 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 blah. He was so true. And it was
And I tell you real quick about Ryback. So I actually contacted Ryback via email and asked him if he'd come on my podcast. I didn't talk to him in person, but just reading his email when he replied back, he wasn't rude. He just explained to me, "Sorry, man, I don't do wrestling podcasts anymore." Just very, very polite. And he got back to me, which is huge because obviously a lot of people don't get back to me. In their defense, I'm sure some don't even get my emails. But yeah, I mean, he seemed like he was a very, very kind and empathetic person, even with rejecting me. So
he was such a good dude and such a good, like I said, such a good human being. Still checks in on me all these years later. There's times where people will share pictures, and it's funny. Like I don't mean to say it braggadocious and stuff like that, but of all the guys he's wrestled, I've seen people share pictures with him and other guys and stuff like that were enhancement guys back at that time. He never puts any of them over at all. And then like people will share pictures of me and him together where he's like throwing me across the ring or whatever. And he's like, that's Brian Hardy. That's Barry Hardy's son. He's a great hand. He's this, he's that. And I'm like, dude, that's awesome. Like, I'm like, cause he doesn't have to do that. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like he's getting anything extra out of it by telling people that. So I'm like, that's pretty cool that, you know, he did that. Even like wrestling the Viking Raiders later down the line and stuff on Raw, like the bigger of the two guys, the one with like the really, not the bald guy. He was so cool, like just so like down to earth and one of those guys that he was a fan of my dad and he was like, you know, I'll take care of you out there. And I'm like, you don't have to do that. You know, like you can do whatever you want, man. If you want to wipe the floor with me, you know? And so that kind of respect's pretty cool.
Yeah. Now I know that, as you said, you didn't get the contract then, but they would call you back. Are we good with time?
Oh, we're great. We're great.
I know he would call you, WWE would call you back 4 years later. But you at that point had been kind of bitter about the whole situation.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
I was completely bitter. When I felt like I didn't get the contract in 2012, I thought, man, I worked my whole life for this. I got here, I did this, I did that. And I just felt like I was so well accepted. There was a few people that were horrible to me. And I talk about that in my book. The very first time at WWE, people that people would not think were horrible people were horrible to me. And I always make people like kind of laugh because somebody that you hear in the wrestling business that has like terrible stories told about them a lot of times is Bill DeMott. And Bill DeMott was great to me. So I'm like, it's so horrible because once again, like none of my stories match a lot of other people's stories in certain senses because like Bill DeMott went to bat for me when he didn't have to. And I've heard so many people say like, oh, Bill DeMott did this to me or did that to me or whatever. And I'm like, Bill DeMott defended me against two guys that everybody else would think are great human beings that were like naturally horrible humans. And Bill DeMott was the only one standing around like, hey, he's going to go back down to the independents tomorrow. Like he's not signed to a contract. Like the way you guys are treating him, he's going to go tell everybody that you guys are horrible, you know, human beings. And this is going to make WWE look bad, you know, and stuff like that. So like I said, a lot of my stuff is different from everyone else. I was bitter. I was sitting at home. I was, you know, luckily the one thing it's been at times it's good, but it can also be detrimental to a fault. Being a musician as well as a wrestler, when times got hard in the wrestling business, I almost ran like wrestling was my wife and music was my mistress. And anytime that the wrestling business would get too hard, whether that would be emotional, physical, anything, anytime that there was any type of abuse going on in the wrestling business, I would run right back to music to basically be my saving grace and pick me up and coddle me and take care of me and this and that. And I would go out and I'd play, you know, bars and different venues and stuff like that for anywhere between $500 to $700 a night as a solo artist. And I literally would play 4 nights a week. So for me, I was never into like the drug scene or anything like that. I had a really, really, really bad addiction to vinyl records. So it was weird because like I'd make like $2,000 a week strumming a guitar and singing. And then I would turn around and take I'd give $1,500 to my wife and say, do whatever you got to do for our family, this and that, whatever. And then I'd take $500 to myself and be like, all right, this is going to be me being selfish. And now I'm going to go buy all these vinyl records that I want to buy and stuff like that. And that was where I found happiness for a long time in my darkness. And it was so bad because like, I felt like I was turning my back on the business that I had loved my entire childhood, my entire life, this and that. And it got so bad to the point where WWE would be messaging me and saying like, hey, we're going to be at the Baltimore Arena for Payback. Would you be interested in coming? You know, this and that and blah, 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 blah. And I still have messages saved on my email where I'm literally like, nope, not interested. Thanks for asking. I'll be in touch with you down the line. Like just really harsh, arrogant, pompous stuff. And I was like, nope, you're not going to accept me. So I'm not going to accept you. And it felt that way for years. I think 2016, I had finally said, okay, I'll come. And I had a really bad injury that year. Now, I've never had any crazy wrestling injuries, I've told people. But I walked outside of my apartment complex in 2016 and I slipped on the thing of black ice. And I literally tore every ligament and tendon in my leg. And I was in like an air cast boot and all this stuff for like 16 plus weeks. I'm watching AJ Styles debut at the Royal Rumble. And I'm literally thinking to myself, like, this is crazy. Like, I grew up like idolizing AJ. I was a huge like early TNA fan from like 02 and stuff like that when they would do the Wednesday night pay-per-views for $9.99 and stuff like that. And I was just like, man, like this is crazy that he's finally here in WWE. And I actually said this not too long, probably like a week ago in a different interview. Like, if you would have told me that in September of 2016 that I would be standing on pay-per-view with AJ Styles backstage at Backlash the night that he won the heavyweight title from Dean Ambrose, I would have called you a liar back in January of that year. Because I would have told you my wrestling career is over. Like, I'm injured. I'm never going to wrestle again. I'm never going to do anything with WWE ever again. And then I find myself in the Richmond Coliseum on pay-per-view with AJ Styles. And I'm literally like, this is the craziest life that I've ever, could have ever imagined. And it all came full circle. And then after that, I'd had a really good relationship with WWE. It was touch and go in 2016. There was a talent that got signed to a contract that didn't like me, and there was a lot of bad blood. I won't mention the guy's name, but he got signed, and it was like as soon as he got signed, all of my contacts stopped talking to me. All of my people in the wrestling business, like sometimes it is that way, you know what I mean? And that's it. It goes that way. It ebbs and flows. And when that guy got fired, when he got released from WWE, instantly every person that was my friend at WWE started talking to me again and was cool with me and everything like that. And then before you knew it, I started getting opportunities with WWE and stuff. So I was like, I always tell people he was the one holding me back from any opportunities that I was getting. I have to take a little bit of responsibility on my end for, being as shitty as I was to WWE all those years beforehand and being bitter. But that didn't play as much of a factor in things as the next couple of years ahead. And then I had returned back to WWE in 2019 and probably worked for WWE more times in 2019 than I ever did in my entire life. I remember one of my referee friends at WWE had looked at the schedule and he saw my name on the schedule and he said, how is Brian being allowed to drive all the way up to this city and be on Raw in this city or SmackDown in this city? Because like they're supposed to be like only a couple 100-mile radius from where you're allowed to attend, as an extra and stuff like that. And they were just sending me everywhere at the time. And I was like, that's when I really felt like, oh my gosh, I'm about to get a contract. Like I'm about to get signed with WWE. And that was really like, from 2012 to 2019, my life was completely different. And I was like, now is the time. Now's the time. I'm about to get signed. This is going to be awesome. And then the pandemic happened.
Yep. And unfortunately, although I would love to talk more about that part, YouTube, they're crazy. And I can have my video kick if we talk about the reason why you ended up not staying with WWE. We'll just say that he decided that he should have the choice about what he does with his body.
Perfect.
It basically. Now, though, after all of that, WWE never called you again once the pandemic was over?
Not a single time. I had reached out. So a lot of the referees that are there are play roles as different talent agents and different people and stuff like that. One of the most coolest referees there, who is now, he was in charge of extra talent for a long time, and now he is in charge of the main roster talent and stuff like that. Such a good guy. Would always constantly answer my emails back and just totally cool. And he pretty much, I'd reached out to him a couple times and he just said, sorry, Brian, I'm not in charge of this or that anymore. I will give you the direct email to the person that is in charge of that. And I'm sure they would love to have you. And then he gave me said direct email to a person. That person, I don't know if that person likes me. dislikes me, I honestly have no clue, because I don't have a good enough relationship with the person to know the person. But ever since that person has taken over, extra talent, local guys, this, that, whatever, I have not gotten a single hit back from that guy. There was a point in time between those two areas where guys like Kenny Dykstra and different guys like that would reach out to me. And that was really cool because they were backstage, you know, dealing with the talent at the time and stuff like that. But then as soon as I would get those emails, respond back to them and this and that and whatever, it would kind of get a little rough. I won't get back into it like you said, but it would get rough because they would say, okay, they book me for the dates. We need you for SmackDown in this city, Raw in this city. And then they would hit me back and go, wait a second, you don't have this, this, and this.
Right.
And I was like, okay. All right. That's the way we're going to play this. And they were like, yeah. So I'm like, cool. Sounds good. And I think at that point in time, I went, it's now or never. I can put up or shut up. And it's up to me now whether to run my own business and run things my way and do things my way. And maybe eventually I'll make my way back up there one day. I think I was so over the idea of being at WWE. The money would be nice. You know, but at the same time, when you really have to, everybody thinks the glitz and glamour of that is nice. But when you really have to sit there and account for your hotels and your travel and your this and your that and whatever, at the end of the day, you don't really know if it's worth, you know, that much. But then again, you're taking a gamble on yourself. Well, if I'm going to gamble on myself, why not just run my own wrestling promotion? Right. Because the thing is, at the end of the day, whether I'm taking that gamble for WWE or whether I'm running my own stuff, you know, at that rate, I might as well just run my own stuff. And however it plays out is however it plays out at the end of the day. My wife's very proud of where we are today as promoters in comparison to where we were years ago. We know that what we're doing today is way more legit than what we were doing back when we were young kids and stuff like that. You know, we didn't know back then. It was trial by error. We were just learning what we were doing at the time. Now there's a lot of people that'll say, oh, he's doing it wrong or he's doing that. And I'm like, I kind of am at the point, once again, not being arrogant, but I kind of look at things in my life and go, dude, I've been around the block 20 times. Like, I know what I'm doing and I know what I'm doing is right.
Right. Well, plus, you know, you kind of took that situation with WWE and it's one of those things you kind of took chicken shit and turned it to chicken noodle soup because I know that you did take an advantage of being allowed in Gorilla and learning some things production wise. It would help you.
The craziest thing is if you ask any guy, whether they like me or whether they hate me, if you ask any guy, new, old, anything, backstage at USW, they will tell you, I don't like that Brian does this or that. And it might be like from a booking standpoint, I don't like that Brian didn't put me over for the title. I don't like that Brian made me wrestle this guy. But you'll never hear people say anything about my setup or whatever. You'll literally always hear people go, oh my God, you walk backstage at USW, Brian Hardy's got like such an intricate setup. It's almost like WWE. And it's like, where do you think I got it from? Like, where do you think, like I was there, I was watching Triple H and Billy Kidman and all these different guys do all the stuff backstage. And I was just hoping to be close enough that I wasn't getting yelled at by taking notes and watching what they were doing. And I'm like, well, I can do this setup and I can do this and I can do that. And I feel like if they ever did call me and say, hey man, you'd be a very valuable asset, I probably would, because I'm using some of the stuff out of their own playbook. But at the same time, like I said, there's also things that I look and I go, I'll use just enough to get by from a professional business standpoint, but then I also have to do things my own way.
Right.
So
now, Ed, this will be the final segment. I know that you said that regardless if your dad was a wrestler or not, this is what you're going to be doing. But when doing my research and I found something out, it made me wonder if your mother subconsciously had a huge hand into pushing you into wrestling, because I know that they got divorced and your mom kind of badmouthed your dad
all the time.
as you were watching wrestling in the morning to see your dad wrestling, because he wasn't really in your life at that point. So it made me wonder, you know, is Brian's mom kind of partially responsible for him falling in love with professional wrestling because of that?
I always had a like punk rock style attitude. So it's almost, I described it as the kid that knows the cookie jar is sitting there and
Mhm.
he's told, don't touch the cookies, don't touch the cookies before dinner. I'm just going to have one cookie before dinner. You know, I was always bucking the system, so to speak,
Mhm.
in that sense. And even on a real life scenario, she was not supportive at all. And to this day, it sucks to say, but it's the truth. I don't speak to my mother. I don't speak to my brother. I don't speak to my sister. My brother and my sister, they have their own lives. It is what it is. My relationship with my mom is non-existent. My father and my relationship has gotten better over the
Mhm.
years. It was rocky for a while. It's really gotten really good over the years. And now I speak to my dad almost every day, but our conversations really aren't about wrestling. They're about
Right.
like cars or music or this or that or whatever. But my mom, she just did not want me being a wrestler. She married a guy that was very abusive to me as a kid, and that guy emotionally and physically was abusive, and he would say things to me like, this is what I think of wrestling and this is what I think of your father and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
he'd take like my wrestling figures and like T-bone them at the legs and break them apart, or like walk in and like step on the turnbuckle to my wrestling ring in my room,
Right.
sitting on the floor or
Wow.
whatever. And like she never did anything about that kind of stuff. She would never, I don't know today if she would say, yeah, I tried, I this, like, no, to my recollection, she never tried to defend, me. It was never, like she never really yelled at him about his actions or anything like that. And I always say to this day, like, I maybe as a younger kid that had played a part in it, maybe I was like, I'll show her, yeah, this and that. But the reality of it is, at the end of the day, I think I've come to peace with everything in my life over the years. And I'm like, it's another one of those things, like, I don't wish her any ill will.
Right.
I tell people all the time, like, don't call me if she passes away, like, because like I
Mhm.
don't want to know.
Right.
And that kind of stuff. But I'm like, and most people would be like, like you can base, I hate when I hear people say you can base the morale of someone's character on how they treat their mother. And I'm
Yes.
like,
Right.
that's horse crap. I'm like, because maybe if you said how they treat their grandmother, because like my grandmother was like a mother to me and she was the
Yeah.
sweetest soul in the world. And up till my grandma's dying days, like my wife and I did everything to take care of her and just be the best human beings that we could be to people. But I think energy is reciprocated.
Right.
If you treat someone great, they're going to treat you great right back. If you treat someone horribly, then you should be expected to be treated horribly right back.
Yeah, I agree. This will be my final question. You actually had to take a lot of heat because of who your dad was with being in the business at certain times.
Yes.
Have you been able to go back to those people or to those uh promotions and mend fences with them or
There's a lot of people over the years that they actually made it easier on me. There
Mhm.
was people that came to me and said, we were wrong about you. We thought you were just some spoiled, silver spoon kid. We did not, like, till my book came out, nobody understood. They thought I was like raised by my father every day of my life and that I had everything under the sun. They didn't realize I was wearing hand-me-downs and I was just your average, Joe and stuff like that. There was just so many promoters that came to me and said, we didn't know your life story. We didn't know what was going on. We just were very horrible to you. We were very harsh to you. We're sorry. I have mended a lot of those fences with people because realistically, I don't look for trouble with people. I tell people that all the time. I always say, like, I'm probably one of the most easiest going people in the world. And if you and I have a problem, maybe you should do some self-evaluation as well on like why we have a problem. Just because I'm the type of guy like that would give anybody the shirt off my back, and to anyone in need. And it's just one of those situations where now, like, there's certain guys that just say, like, man, like it's funny to hear at times. Sometimes it's cool, sometimes it's not. When I walk by in a locker room and there will be guys that are 20, 30, 40-year friends of my father's, and they're like, God, you do stuff just exactly like your dad. Like, you look exactly like your dad, your hair, your facial expressions, you're this, you're that. And I'm like, I don't know if that's flattering to me or not, at times, but there's a soft spot in my heart for my dad. And I always tell people all the time, we never had the, Brady Bunch thing going on in our house, but it's gotten a lot better over the years. And forgiveness is a big thing. Like, you don't ever have to forget, but you can forgive. And there's things that have happened in my life that I've forgiven, multiple people for. And I really do try to just be the best day-to-day person. Like, I can't preach to my kids how they should act and how things should go if I'm not willing to set that example and do that myself.
Exactly.
So a lot of times, I tell them there are things that I don't like about this business. There are people that I don't like in this business, but I can maintain a professional level, for everyone. Like I said, I don't have to go to dinner with them and be their best buddy, but I have to do business, so that's the thing.
Absolutely. Brian, thank you so much. This is honest God, one of my favorite interviews. I think you're an incredible guy.
I enjoyed it, man. I thought you had great questions. So
thank you. I appreciate that. Everybody, we will be back tomorrow with the Cooker Bob Cook, my co-host Mark, and myself to do the review of Monday Night Raw. Join us then. Again, Brian, thank you so very much. I appreciate it. You're always welcome on the show. If you ever need to promote, if you ever need to promote anything, let me know.
Thank you.
You can always come on. Appreciate that. Everybody, you guys have a great week.